So if you're a Can-Am owner, you know that they notoriously have a weak front frame section. We came up with the solution with the Can-Am Maverick R Frame Stiffener, and today we're gonna show you how to get it installed. What's up guys, I'm Braden Adams, welcome to my garage, and today we're going to be showing you how to install SuperATV's frame stiffener on this Can-Am Maverick R. Here's the tool list, and let's get on over to the machine. Alright, so there's going to be a few first steps that's going to vary on how your machine's set up. The first one is a guaranteed. You're going to need to remove both wheels and tires from the front of the machine. The second step, if you have a bumper installed on the machine, you're going to want to remove the hardware. Here is the hole where the bumper tube would come through. There's a tab back here. You just remove the bolt out of the bumper tube and you're good to go. On a factory machine that has never been worked on, there's going to be a plastic panel on the bottom side of the machine here. It's going to have 4 Torx screws in it. Go ahead and remove that. Get it out of the way. If you have a winch, it says in the instructions to remove the fair lead and then remove the 2 screws here on this front plastic section. We can do it without removing it, so I'm going to show you how to do that today. If you would like to remove it just to make it a little bit easier for you, you absolutely can. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to be doing is removing the front A-arm bolts, which we will access those through this hole located here. All right, so we're going to go right through here with a 21mm socket. So those bolts aren't just going to come out by any means. So what we're going to have to do is get a pry bar in there and kind of work the bolt out. So once you get the bolt close to coming out, you can kind of grab a hold of the arm and pivot it around, reach in there and grab it by hand and pull it out, or needle nose pliers. As you've seen, I kind of took my pry bar in there, slid it up, and just kind of tapped the actual face of the bolt there on the flange to get it out a little bit easier as well. Now you're going to go ahead and disconnect your sway bar link on one side. I like to remove the nut and then just go ahead and put it right back on the threads. So now what we're going to do is get a pry bar in between the A-arm tab and the winch mount. So we're just going to put a pry bar in between that gap at the very top, open it up enough to where we can get our frame stiffener slid into position. So what I like to do is just take a pry bar, slide it in at the very top, and give it a couple taps just to open that gap up. It opens the gap up enough to where we can grab our frame stiffener, and we can get this piece to slide up in between the frame tab and the winch mount, and then our factory A-arm hardware is going to go through these holes. So we're going to do that now. So get it up into position there, and just hammer it the rest of the way in. And then what we're going to be concerned about is lining up the holes for the A-arm. So I'm going to run a punch in there and kind of waller the holes around until they line up. Once you get it lined up, reinstall your factory bolt, but before you do that, I highly recommend to install some sort of thread locker. I'm going to be using red Loctite. I don't really plan on taking this machine back apart. I want this to stay together, and even if I do, red Loctite, you can heat it up and get the hardware out. It comes factory with a thread locker on it, so then I'm just going to line up the bolt in the same factory hole. Now it's just going through our bracket. Not really concerned with getting it started or anything like that quite yet. We still have quite a few things to do before it's time to even think about tightening hardware. I just want to make sure it's in the hole and lined up. Same deal on this side. Like right now, it's a little bit low for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to maintain pressure with my hip. Tap the arm up and go ahead and get my hardware started through the hole in the bracket. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the rearmost A-arm hardware. This is going to be pretty tight. It's going to be difficult to get to. We've already loosened the majority of this hardware, so we're going to end up just using a 3/8 ratchet or electric ratchet to get it off. Most likely, you're going to end up having to use a breaker bar in order to get this bolt cracked loose. So we've got it loose. Go ahead and relieve the pressure off of the hardware and remove the bolt completely. We'll do the same thing for the opposite side. All right, now we're gonna grab our lower bracket and we're gonna slide it into the rear section of the frame where we just removed our factory hardware. Now we're gonna grab our short M10 bolt and we're gonna install it through the bracket, through the front section of the frame. As you're gonna notice when you look in here, there's gonna be a hole. Just make sure that hole's lined up and then just take your M10 nut and install it onto the backside. Now we're gonna grab our factory hardware. Once again, I advise you to put some thread locker on. We're gonna put a little red Loctite. We're gonna put our bolt through our frame stiffener bracket, through the factory tab and through the A-arm. Once the hardware started, we're just gonna go ahead and run it up. We're not gonna fully tighten it. We're just gonna run it up to where the bolt head touches. Now we're gonna go ahead and fully tighten down the front M10 bolt that we installed. We're gonna use a 13mm socket, 15mm wrench. Now we're gonna grab our spacer. This is gonna go in between the frame stiffener and the frame. You're just gonna make sure that this side with the rolled edge is facing towards the outside, and then the hardware is gonna come up through just like so. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our carriage bolts, slide them through the bottom side of the frame stiffener up through the frame and pinch it down with our top bracket that we recently just installed. And you just wanna make sure that this goes through, and then you're gonna use your M10 nylock nuts. So we're just gonna grab this spacer, slide it in. And I'm not gonna fully tighten these quite yet. I'm just leaving them in there so we know that everything's gonna stay aligned, because the last thing that we're gonna do is tighten all of our hardware for the suspension down here. I wanna leave this rearmost bolt just kind of loosen in place, again, just to keep the alignment, but we will have to remove this rearmost bolt again whenever we go to fully tighten down this rearmost A-arm bolt at the very end of the installation. All right, so the next thing that we're gonna do is go ahead and remove our castle nut for our axle completely. I had already removed the cotter key. Whenever you go to do this, you're gonna wanna make sure that you just pull your cotter key out, and then you can remove your castle nut, your washer. And we're gonna remove our tie rod end. Once again, go ahead and remove the cotter key out of it, and then you're gonna need an 18 socket, an 18 wrench, and also for the castle nut, it was a 30mm socket. So what I like to do with my tie rod, once I remove my bolt, I just go ahead and throw my hardware back through the tie rod end. So we're gonna go ahead and remove the nut off the shock here. It's a 21-21, 15 and 15 for the pinch bolt hardware. So what we're gonna do now is go ahead and grab a strap, wrap it around the cage. I just like to loop it around the tube just like that. Kind of let that hang. We're just gonna let it sit here for the time being. And then we're gonna go ahead and remove our upper pinch bolt. Should come out pretty easily. It's not gonna be under any pressure at this point in the travel. Then you're gonna grab a hold, pick up, and you're gonna be trying to get the tension off of the shock hardware. You can go ahead, pick up, get the upper arm disconnected, kind of roll this back out of the way. Grab your shock bolt, put it back through, grab your strap, hook it onto the bolt, make sure your axle comes out here. The reason we're doing this is we want to make sure we support this lower arm. We don't want to put too much of an angle on the axle to where it could potentially pull the CVs apart. All right, so now we've lowered our machine down so that way we can access all of our upper A-arm hardware as well as our upper shock hardware. In order to gain access to it though directly, what you're gonna have to do is grab the hood, pick straight up on it. Just has these tabs, so just make sure you're pulling up straight on either side. It just pops out of the way, then lips out of the way. And we're gonna be going after these bolts here, our shock bolts, and then our rear upper A-arm bolts. So the first thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and remove the shock bolts and remove the shocks from the machine. So now what we need to do is pick up on the upper arm, grab a hold of the shock, pull the hardware free, and you're gonna have to lift up on the arm enough to where you can grab the shock and remove it from the machine. And then just gently lay your upper arm down. We're gonna take our shock and sit it out of the way. We're gonna do the same thing for the opposite side. Now we're gonna go ahead and remove the front, or the forwardmost A-arm hardware here. We're not gonna remove the rearmost hardware quite yet. We're gonna give it a minute. Now we're gonna grab the upper forwardmost bracket. The flat side of the bracket is gonna go up against the frame tabs. The side that has the gusset to it is gonna be facing towards the rear, so it's gonna install just like so. First, we have to remove the hardware here. What you wanna do when you remove this hardware is just pick up on your A-arm, remove the tension, slide the bolt out. Do that for both sides. You have to do this simultaneously. Now this bracket is just gonna lip right in between the upper shock mount bracket, the upper portion of the frame, and line up with the tabs. Grab a hold of the A-arm, maneuver it around until it lines up. Once it's lined up, go ahead and take your nuts, reinstall them. Now we're gonna remove the upper rearmost hardware. Go ahead and remove the hardware out of here. So now we're gonna grab the last bracket, like I said, and we're gonna take the factory hardware and slide it through, so it'll be oriented just like so. Again, just grab a hold of the arm, get it lined up, put the hardware through. And again, make sure you're putting red Loctite or some sort of a Loctite on these bolts. So what I like to do on these Can-Am Maverick Rs is fully tighten all the hardware once the machine's sitting on the ground. Unfortunately, with the upper rearmost hardware, we're not really gonna be able to do that anymore because we're adding the frame stiffener in, so we're gonna have to put a socket on it. So what my recommendation is to kind of set these arms out where the machine's gonna be sitting at ride height. So just kind of give you an example of that. It's gonna be sitting roughly in this vicinity here. So I would kind of hold the arm in that area and then fully tighten that hardware. So with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and do that now. So one thing we want to talk to you about before we walk you through the reassembly. In the kit, we provide you with some flat self-tappers. The reason that we send those in the kit is if you have a skid plate, what you would do is position your skid plate on the bottom of the frame stiffener and then utilize the provided hardware to install it to the frame stiffener. If you don't have a skid plate, or if you don't want to install that portion of the skid plate to the front of the machine, that is totally okay, but we do give you the option to do so if you would like. So now all you're gonna do, the entire frame stiffener is installed. It's just gonna be reassembly. So what I'm gonna start off with is going ahead and reinstalling my shocks to each side. Once I get the shocks installed, I'm gonna fully tighten down the shock hardware. That's acceptable to do that. Like I previously stated a moment ago, I don't want to fully tighten down all of my suspension hardware until my machine is sitting on the ground completely. And again, be sure to torque it to the manufacturer's torque spec. Use thread locker. I highly advise you to use thread locker, especially if the hardware is directly threaded into the frame of the machine. Once you go through, like I said, tighten everything down, reassemble anything that you may have disassembled on this installation. If you had a bumper, go ahead and reinstall that. And really just make sure you've got everything tightened down, everything looks correctly, and just double, triple check the hardware. If you leave hardware loose, there is no point in installing a frame stiffener. It can cause even more damage. So very important, make sure the hardware is tight. I like using a paint marker. Take a paint marker, mark it to the frame. It's something that you can check before every ride. It is an imperative step to the installation. So we're gonna go ahead and get our machine whipped back into shape here. We're gonna go ahead and reinstall everything that we showed you all how to disassemble. Just reverse the steps. Make sure you put the correct hardware in the same spots. And again, I can't emphasize it enough, and make sure everything is tight. All right guys, so now you're gonna sit your machine down on the ground, fully tighten all the hardware. Once you've done that, that is all there is to it to install SuperATV's frame stiffener on this Can-Am Maverick R. Be sure to check the description below to pick yours up today, and while you're there, drop a like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.